Welcome to Inside 11Alive News Investigates. I'm Rebecca Lindstrom. The hurricane season so far has been fairly calm, but residents in Georgia still remember Helene, which killed at least 28 people across the state and caused significant flooding even in parts of the metro. As we approach the one-year anniversary, we are taking a look at what made this storm so different. I talked with one resident who lives in the Buckhead neighborhood, Westover Plantation. Even with all of the words of warning, she says she was surprised by the damage to her home.
We gutted the place, so we ripped up all the floors. We found out that there is asbestos in the walls and the floors. So then we had to cut 2 feet of drywall everywhere, rip out all of the lower cabinets, rip out the bathroom cabinets. All of the appliances came out. All of the furniture got stored somewhere else. Thankfully, none of the furniture was destroyed, but anything that wasn't real wood, like soaked up water and had to get thrown away and redone. All the carpets or the rug got taken out and thrown away, replace all of that.
Joining me now is our chief meteorologist, Chris Holcomb. I wanted to talk with you for a moment about, Helene for you was just hours and hours and hours of nonstop coverage, just watching all of this rain as it was coming into our community. So as you think back on this anniversary, what comes to your mind at first?
Well, at first, when we were tracking this storm coming in, at points, the track of the storm was coming right through Atlanta for the forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Once the storm did move in, the track was actually a little bit more to the east of us, and that was a good thing because that took the worst of the damage over into parts of East Georgia, and we would never wish anything bad on anybody else, but we kind of dodged a bullet, and I say kind of because it was still close enough to us that we did get some rain here and a lot of rain. And what makes this storm unique is the fact that not only did we have the rain the day that Helene came in, but we had a lot of rain before Helene moved in. And this is called a predecessor rain event. Now, if you look at the bar that's on the far right, that's September 27th. That's the day that Helene came in. And that storm itself gave us 3.38 inches. However, 2 days prior, we already had more tropical rain coming in before Helene even got here. So on September 25th, we had 3.42 inches of rain. The day before Helene, we had 4.32. So that's more than 7 inches of rain that fell before the hurricane even got here. So the ground was already saturated. Creeks and streams were already about to overflow. And then you add the additional rain that was more than 11 inches, almost a foot of rain that fell in that 3-day period. And those creeks and streams just couldn't take it anymore. So it wasn't just Helene. It was the days prior where we had what we call that predecessor rain event, a lot of rain, and the ground just couldn't take it all.
And I know we've kind of talked about all these different things that have to come together to create sort of like that perfect storm environment. And it sounds like this was one of those things. I mentioned earlier that this had been a relatively calm start to the hurricane season. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would, because we do see some activity that's been out there. All of these storms have been curving away. We've already had a Cat 5 that came earlier in the season, but that curved away. So even though there's activity out there in the Atlantic, people don't really pay attention unless it's coming and is going to hit our coastline or is going to impact us. Now, we are just past the statistical peak. The statistical peak is on September 10th. So even though we're past that peak, this is still the time where things can still be active. And some of the things that we are seeing so far that has suppressed the hurricane activity so far, those things are starting to disappear. So we do think that the second half of the season is still going to be rather active. So we're not finished with it yet. And hurricane season goes until November 30th. And so we can still get a lot of activity here in the month, the rest of September, and also into October and even into November. But that's when it usually starts slowing down a little more.
And when you're talking about it being active, obviously there's the activity that we have seen, but it just hasn't impacted our community directly. But are you meaning it could still also be active right here in Georgia?
It could. It only takes one, is what we always say. And there are times when the National Hurricane Center will give predictions and they'll say, okay, it's going to be a below average season this year, but it only takes one to cause damage. When Hurricane Andrew hit Miami, everybody remembers that one, that was a year with below average activity. But it still just took one storm that hit South Florida that caused all of that damage. So there's no way that we can tell. I mean, we've been lucky that so far all the storms have not really impacted us. But we do expect more, and there's no way to tell if it will be Georgia or if it's going to be mainly the Gulf Coast or the Mid-Atlantic region. We just don't know that yet, but we still have to be aware, even though this season has been slow so far.
All right, well, hang tight. We heard at the beginning with our discussion with Haley Fuchsia about the damage she sustained. And when I met up with her, she said she really felt caught off guard. She understood the forecast. She knew that the rain was coming, that the rain had been there and all of that. But what she didn't know was that her house could actually be at risk for flood damage. And that word risk and how we determine who is at risk has raised a number of questions lately. FEMA flood maps tell us the likelihood swollen waterways will impact our house and whether we have to buy flood insurance to live there.
So we're right here.
On the map, Haley Fuchsia's Atlanta home in Westover Plantation looks safe from what the government calls a 100-year flood risk. But Fuchsia learned storms don't use a map for directions. Paloma Spalding, who asked not to be identified on camera, also remembers the day Helene hit.
It was just unbelievable to see nature put that much water in one place so fast.
Yet a different kind of map would suggest these residents shouldn't have been surprised. That exact same FEMA event that says you were not at risk?
Fully in it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm right here.
This map is from a company called First Street. It says the flood risk in Fulton, DeKalb, Cobb, and Gwinnett is actually 8 times greater than what FEMA reports. Maps like these have raised a lot of questions in the past year, so we went to Georgia Tech civil and environmental engineering professor Herman Fritz to understand the difference.
It comes down to what kind of events are we trying to simulate.
Fritz says FEMA relies on historical flood data to determine how rivers might swell. But First Street tries to predict the future of things like climate change and growing storm intensity. Remember, Atlanta broke a century-old record with more than 11 inches of rain in 48 hours when Helene hit, according to State of Georgia climatologists. Pair that with a lot of development.
The land is less able to absorb the rainfall, and we are going to see places flood that hadn't flooded before.
That's why First Street says it also maps the risk of flooding from overwhelmed urban drainage systems.
But it was just coming up through the floors.
That is the kind of flooding that impacted these homes at Westover Plantation. We talked with Fritz in front of a model of a New Orleans levee that broke during Hurricane Katrina. He says building and maintaining the right infrastructure is critical.
In Atlanta, and we literally have storm sewer pipes that are more than 150 years old.
While predictive models are filled with uncertainties, and models like First Street require a subscription to see, homeowners here say it would have been helpful if there were a way to give residents a clear picture of the risk so they knew how to prepare, because this type of flooding can be avoided.
I've heard of these little things that you can put down that can alert you, like your phone, when water hits it. It would have woken us up so that we could actually get up and start trying to get water out.
If you dam up that drainage hole and the area around the powder room toilet, with those stoppers, the water can't even come in.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah, truly.
In Atlanta, Rebecca Lindstrom, 11Alive News investigates. Residents did tell me the city recently cleaned the debris and some of the sediment that was in those, pipes, and that they're hoping has kind of increased the capacity. But as we know, before big storms, we usually see the workers, they're going out there, they're trying to clean those drainage ditches. Some people probably don't even realize exactly why they're doing it and what's going on, but this is the very reason, because they're trying to let as much of that water get into the system and then get through the system so that it isn't coming up into people's houses. But it really was interesting to look at the different purpose behind these two different sets of maps, and then looking at my own risk and where that might be in the mix.
And I think those maps are so important, because if someone is about to buy a house and they're wanting to know the flood risk, and they see that one map says one thing and then they see other maps that say another, because there are so many other things involved, like even just construction nearby that maybe they've paved over an area that now is going to produce runoff to add more water. that would come into those more flood-prone areas too. So they have to keep those maps also up to date based on any kind of construction that's been nearby.
Well, that's where I think it also does good just to go and knock on some doors, ask people what they've experienced in the past,
Right.
because again, what might be on a map may be different than the reality. Well, we did say knowledge is power. So before I let you go, I just wanted to ask you, you know, we are still in hurricane season. Knowing that knowledge is power, what should we be keeping in mind over the next few months?
I just think that if you are in an area, even if it's highlighted on a map or not, but you know that you're near a creek or stream that has flooded before, chances are it's going to happen again. So it's really just having that knowledge, being aware when you hear us talking about big storms that are coming in, and also paying attention to these flood watches and flood warnings. And a lot of times we'll say,
attention to you.
Yeah, these flood watches are in effect if you live in a flood-prone area. Just knowing where you are, and even if maybe your neighborhood or your plot of land doesn't show anything on the map, but your next door neighbor's is on it, that could easily come in. As we know, we're seeing a lot of these storms now that are more intense, with more rain, heavier rain coming in with some of these storms, not all of them, but just because it hasn't flooded before doesn't mean that it will never flood, because it could still happen.
Yeah, knowledge is power, and prevention so important
And
if you've
being
got
aware.
that opportunity.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this story, like so many that we do, started with a tip. If there is something you want us to investigate, call us at 404-873-9111 or email investigates@11alive.com. Thanks for watching Inside 11 Alive News Investigates.